Woman from Richmond City, Ms. McClellan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for a point of personal privilege and a motion.
Gentleman has the floor.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, as we continue to honor Black History Month, we heard a little bit yesterday about the awful point of our history with segregation and massive resistance. Oftentimes in that story, we lose sight of the true heroes of that time, and that are the children who went to those schools and were on the front lines of that fight. And so I want to focus.
House will come to order.
I want to focus very briefly on 4 young girls. The first has started to get recognition as evident in the Civil Rights Memorial out on the Capitol grounds, is Barbara Johns. Barbara Johns attended Moton High School, which was the school for blacks in Farmville and Prince Edward County. The parents in Farmville had often been petitioning the school board for a better school for their children. And to give you a sense of what those kids had to face, according to a first-person account from Barbara's sister, in winter the school was very cold, and lots of times we had to put on our jackets, and the students that sat closest to the wood stove were very warm, and the ones who sat farthest away were very cold. And I remember being cold a lot and sitting in the classroom with my jacket on. When it rained, we would get water through the ceiling, so there were pails sitting around the classroom, and we would have to raise our umbrellas to keep the water off our heads. It was very difficult to try to learn. And we've also heard stories that the students who sat closest to the wood-burning stove would actually have hot coals or hot ashes land on them and burn them. And you can imagine how difficult it was to learn in that condition. But the children, led by Barbara, wanted to take a stand. So on April 23rd, 1951, they had a plan. They got the principal out of the school by one of the students, went into the town, called the principal, pretended to be a local businessman, saying, 2 of your students are causing trouble in the town. So the principal left because he knew if any of his students were in fact in trouble in the town, they would all feel the heat. When the principal was gone, Barbara went on the announcement, on the speaker, and called a school assembly. Well, the teachers thought that it was the principal who had done it, so everyone went down to the auditorium, and there standing on stage was Barbara. And she, to the surprise of even her sister, said, "We're going to have a walkout." And they did. And they walked out, and they went into the town to demand a better school system. Not surprisingly, they got arrested. This sparked the Virginia case that became part of one of the 5 cases in Brown versus the Board of Education. Because Barbara reached out to Oliver Hill. When they reached out to Oliver Hill, all they wanted was a better school. Oliver Hill and Spotswood Robinson and Samuel Tucker said, "We will take your case, but not to get you a better school. We want integrated schools." And they said, okay. And it went up to the Supreme Court, and separate but equal was struck down. And you heard a little yesterday about how the Commonwealth of Virginia responded. Well, 9 years later, here in the city of Richmond, 2 other girls, Gloria Jean Meade, 13, and Carol Irene Swan, 12, made history. As part of massive resistance, as the Commonwealth started to realize this is not going to work, we have to do something to integrate, the General Assembly formed the Pupil Placement Board. And the Pupil Placement Board, a state agency, would pick which African American students got to integrate white schools. And here in Richmond, they picked these 2 girls, who on September 6, 1960, surrounded by police officers, integrated Chandler High School in the North Side. The first week or so, when they had police escorts, everything was fine. When those police escorts left, terrorism began. And one of those students, Carol Swan, later wrote in her memoirs, It was scary the first day, but it was largely peaceful compared to what was going on in other places in the South. No one dragged you out to beat you up. It was more like little tortures each day. There was name calling. People would spit on you or trip you up. They would take the top of their ink pen and squirt the ink all over your clothes. You really wouldn't be aware of it until it soaked through to your skin. Lunch was always very messy because they would throw all kinds of things. If someone throws a milk carton and it's not empty, when it hits you, it splashes all over you. Afterward, you frequently looked like you swam through your lunch. And if any adults saw it, they did nothing. The teachers didn't intervene. They didn't want us there. I had the pleasure of meeting Carol Swan 53 years later as she told her story at a panel in Churchill. 53 years later, you could hear the emotion in her voice as she remembered those days that were so terrifying for her. The minute she graduated, she fled to New Jersey and very rarely sets foot back in the Commonwealth of Virginia except to tell her story. That brings me to the last girl, Ann Holton, and her sister and her siblings. In 1969, the governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia, in a coming full circle, decided that his kids would integrate Richmond's public schools. And he walked one daughter to school, and his wife walked the other. And she was 12 years old at the time and didn't fully understand the importance of that moment until she became an adult. So there are hundreds, if not thousands, of stories from Richmond to Warrenton, Shenandoah Valley, Tidewater, Arlington, all over Virginia, that often get lost. But their memories, the memories of those days, have seared into the hearts and minds of those children and their families. I mentioned the panel in Churchill where both Ann Holton, Carol Swan, and another member of the Moton strike told their stories. In the audience was a member of the Richmond City School Board who had just recently been one of the people to vote to close certain schools, which sparked a backlash in the African American community in Richmond. He came up to me afterwards and he said, "I had no idea." And it wasn't until he heard those three now women tell the story of what they went through when they were 12 that he fully understood why there was such a visceral reaction from the community. The importance of Black History Month, the importance of telling these stories, is because today, too many of us were born after that terrible time. And we may not fully understand why the legacy of that time still holds true today. By learning from our past, by talking about our past, we can heal. And once we heal, we can move forward. So, Mr. Speaker, now my motion, I move that when the House adjourn today, it do so in honor of all of those children who stood on the front lines in one of the darkest times in our history, and because of them, Virginia and this country is a better place. Thank you.
The gentlewoman from Richmond City. The gentleman from Richmond City moves that when the House adjourned today, it adjourn in the honor of all of those children who stood valiantly during their younger years and helped to get the Commonwealth through a tough time. As many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. That motion is agreed to.